So my name is David Boes, and I was president of the ACOOG in 2017-18. I had a fairly long history with ACOOG prior to that. I was born in Toledo, Ohio, and I came from a family of 6 children. Neither one of my parents had gone to college, so we were first generation. We also were born in the post-World War II era, where our parents never had those opportunities, but it was expected that we would. So I was always directed, for probably a variety of reasons that influenced me growing up, but I was always directed towards wanting to serve either as a priest in the Catholic Church or as a physician. Once I ruled out becoming a priest, then it was left to become a physician. I had no backup plan, so I had to make it. That's what I wanted to do. And I think it's just because I've always enjoyed trying to serve and help others and learn myself along the way. And I've got an interest in teaching, as I can talk about throughout my life as well. So that's kind of how I started. I remember in high school, I went to a Catholic high school, and I wrote a paper on, it was called venereal diseases back then. We had to write a term paper our 3rd year, and I elected to write a paper on venereal diseases. Why? I have no idea, except that I wanted to do something in medicine, and that must have been something I became aware of in my teen years. And so it was very controversial. Catholic school, we can't talk about this, and so finally they had to have a special meeting. It got approved. And this was long before we only knew about syphilis and gonorrhea and a few things like that. We had no idea what chlamydia was at that time. So that was my probably earliest scholarly activity I can think of related to medicine, and subsequently really to my career in women's health. So then I went off to college at the University of Detroit, and I really wasn't aware of osteopathic medicine growing up. I became aware in Detroit partly because of my pre-med counselor, and partly because Michigan was a stronghold state for osteopathic medical training. So I went to University of Detroit. I wrote another paper there, again, not realizing what I was going to be coming to do, but in a physiology class, I did a full term paper on the physiology of the placenta. And so that was my second piece that probably kind of directed where I was going ultimately. When I was going into medicine, as I became aware of osteopathic medicine, I just felt more drawn in the direction of the tenets of osteopathic medicine, and that's what drew me to applying to DO colleges. At that time, Michigan State was still a relatively new college, but they were right there in Michigan. And then I subsequently interviewed at several places, DO schools, and wanted to go to CCOM, Chicago Osteopathic. That was my first choice because of the clinic that they had there and the hospital right there on site. So that's where I ended up going to Chicago. But I fully intended to do family practice. That's what I was going to do. And I came back. In those days, we did a rotating internship for a year, and I did my internship at Riverside Osteopathic, which was a division of the Detroit Osteopathic Hospital Corporation at that time. And I chose Riverside because I wanted to do OB as part of being a family practitioner. For those of you who remember Marcus Welby, I was kind of wanted to be like Marcus Welby DO. So that was my aspiration. And I did my internship, and during my internship year, I kind of started to realize even in the late 1970s, I started to realize the limitations that one had if you tried to do obstetrics as a family practitioner. And I guess my personality also was drawn to wanting to know a lot about a smaller subject area than in family practice, where you really have to know a lot about a lot of things. And so I just gravitated in that direction. And it was actually, I was debating this during my internship year and not sure what I should do. And Paul Kruger, who was a past president of our college as well, was senior resident, said, you should just do OB. That's what you're supposed to do. So I'm like, oh, okay, that was the push I needed. And I went home and talked to my wife, and I said, what do you think? I know that OB is a time-consuming specialty. And she said, whatever you wish to do. And she was a family practitioner herself. Said then that's okay. So I had her support, and we were starting a family at that time as well. I had met my wife, Diane, in medical school at CCOM. So that's what I did. I did the residency there, and I was very heavily influenced relative to our college because I had Dr. Orth was the program director at that time, another past president, and Dr. William Hull was also one of my trainers, and he's past president as well. Dr. Glinter, he was there as well. So I had a lot of influence in that direction. And then subsequently, Dr. David Wolf was seen. I didn't really know him during my internship year because he was a fourth-year resident and out on rotations, and so I really got to know Paul Kruger better. But then when I was a first-year resident, Dr. Wolf was first year in practice, and he's another one of our past presidents. And so again, I was heavily influenced for the college. The other support that I had in terms of learning about our college was it was expected that second years we would go to the ACOOG meeting in the fall, and I did that in Philadelphia. And then in the spring of our senior year, our fourth year, we would be allowed to go to the annual convention. So I had both of those experiences as well. I really did not become involved with the college, serving on any committees during my residency, or even early in my practice career. I went into a practice in Lapeer, Michigan, a rural community in Michigan, and I was there for 4 years. And I really wanted to even though I knew I wanted to teach ultimately, I wanted to start my career someplace where I could hone my skills, and I just didn't feel like I was going to be ready to train residents coming out of my own residency at that time. So I practiced there for 4 years, and then I went and joined Dr. Billman in practice in Lansing, Michigan, another past president of ACOG. So I was constantly influenced by these folks as I went along. And I knew I was also interested in teaching as well. I had done some teaching in college. I did some teaching at Chicago Osteopathic. I did an extended year of training there, so I spread out my last 2 years over 3 years and taught biochemistry to medical students in a clinical scenario, not the hardcore biochemistry. But in return for that, I got my tuition covered, so I didn't have to worry about that. And so when I came to Lansing, they had a residency, they had the medical school there at Michigan State, and so I became involved in both of those, of course, as well. So that was my early career. And then I really didn't because I was raising a family, I was in a practice of 1 and 2, which is kind of how it was back then. You were really on call every other night and every other weekend. And so I did not get involved too much with the college or any committees until a few years later. And then I reached out, I think, probably to Dr. Wolf, because he kind of was my mentor he started into practice, as I mentioned, when I started residency, and Dr. Kruger as well. And I said, how do I get involved in the college when I felt like I was ready to do that? And so subsequently, I was also interested in serving on the certifying board, and it so happened the same year I get called to start with both. So I don't recall what I started with at ACOG. I'm going to say it was probably the membership committee. And then I was moved to the REC, which is, as you know, the PESC, the Residency Evaluation Committee. Served on that committee for a number of years, and I'm not sure what else. And then at some point, I came onto the board and got, again, the opportunity was there for me to work with, learn from, develop collegial friendships through ACOOG and working with these folks. And so I went through my full 6 years on the board and then timed out. So I felt like I was kind of done with that portion of my life, and then I got called back to be on the board again to move through the chairs to step up and be the president. So that's fast forwarding to 2017, 2018. I also became involved pretty heavily with the ACOOG the year that Dr. Wolf was president. He, at that time, both in the MD world and the DO world, there was a shortage of people going into OB/GYN, whether it was lifestyle related, whether it was fear of malpractice, I'm not sure, but we felt a need through our college to get students more involved. And so Dr. Wolf tasked me doing a subcommittee looking at how to attract students to OB/GYN and how to expose them to that. And so I did that. I put together a committee, and I drew people from several different resources around, both a PhD educator from Michigan State, who was very involved also, which we ultimately grew into the statewide campus system at Michigan State. He was on the committee, a number of other people from around the country, and we had a meeting and did a white paper and started the student society. So that was really at the direction of Dr. Wolf. I credit him for having the foresight and the organizational skills to say, can you do this? So we did. So the National Student Society was something that we sat in this committee and tried to figure out. We had some students on there as well. I remember Becky West was one of the students. She was, I believe, from the New York school, and she was very helpful in directing us as well to what she thought students needed at that point in time. And we decided that we needed to provide them opportunities that perhaps they didn't have before. Opportunities within our college, opportunities coming to our meetings, opportunities for them to begin to network with each other as well. And this was kind of in the same, I don't recall the exact years as far as development of internet and other social media in ways that they could communicate with each other. But subsequently, it did grow into that as another way they could communicate with each other. But we began this society that students were brought to the meetings. We developed a full educational day for the students. I don't think we had that before. And we still offer that to this day. In the fall meeting, we have a full day dedicated to the students. We talk about, for the first and second years that come, we teach them osteopathic skills that we use in OB/GYN. And then third and fourth years, we do prep for clerkship, prep for interviews. We do the mock interviews with many different people, folks from our college participating in that. So that was another thing that I think grew out of as the student society grew. It started with very, very small numbers. And each year what's really kind of rewarding to see is how that organization grows from year to year. At some point, Namdi joined ACOOG, and he's been instrumental in leading and directing us through the administrative offices of ACOOG in supporting the student organization. We've done webinars a couple times a year where we reach out to realizing all the students can't come to our meetings. So we've done national webinars where we have talked about a career as an OB/GYN. What is that like? That's the other thing we tried to do through what we learned in the process of putting the student society together was, what is it like to be an OB/GYN? What are the opportunities? What is practice like? And we tried to emphasize what we feel are the positives, the continuity of care through a woman's life, through reproductive years and beyond, and so forth. So we reached out with webinars, but this time the internet and so forth was well developed that we could do that in a Zoom-like fashion, and have done that for 4 or 5 years now.
What led you into doing like the leadership track for ACOOG, and what would you tell those students and residents who are already busy with their career or their family or whatever?
Well,
I mean, during your time, we've seen where we went from 90% male profession medicine to more than 50% to maybe 90% are female in OBGYN now.
Correct, yeah. So in medicine in general, when I started at Chicago Osteopathic in 1973, we had 100 students in our class. It was 93 men and 7 women. And they were so proud because that was the most women they'd ever had in a class at CCO. I mean, probably, consistent with the rest of the country at that time as well. So fast forward to now, where not only is there a balance, as there should be, between men and women in medicine, but also many women go into OBGYN and fewer men. And I don't necessarily think that's great in and of itself. I hope that balances out over time. I don't believe that gender should matter in that regard, but it's just how things have evolved. So in terms of leadership, I think that the first thing is you don't have to, I would say from my own personal experiences, you don't have to have done something during your residency or even in your early years of practice to become involved. I think that I saw and learned from the folks who trained me the benefits and the joy that they derived from being involved in the college, being involved in the certifying board, and going to the meetings. And so that was an attraction that I knew I was interested in, but I just didn't feel I had the time with a young family and at my first few years of practice. So you don't have to be involved right away to become involved later. I think if there's a desire to work in a smaller organization where you can make an impact easier than you can perhaps in a large organization, that's an advantage that we've had in our college, and the collegiality and the friendships that we have are great. And just coming to this meeting in 2022, where we've been living in hibernation for the last 2 years, has been huge. Just to see everybody again and interact in person. We've all seen each other on Zoom meetings, but it's not the same as coming together. So I think there's that element. And I think that it's just very easy to work in this organization, and you can learn as you go. You can, like Dr. Cannon said in an earlier discussion, she first came to the meetings and she was kind of quiet, just tried to learn what was going on, and then gradually you start to feel comfortable and participate. So that's my message, I guess, is you can do it.
Do you have any remarkable or funny or interesting experiences that you would share that's kind of one of those wearing your personality on your shirt sleeves also means getting dirty and working a little bit more than... we gave an interview to a very well-known past president. He said, we had to prove ourselves. We weren't second best. We could go out there and work just as hard as everybody else. Anything of your experiences you'd like to share like that? I think that, again, by being led by the folks that I did, and I also left out another influential person in my career, was Dr. Labrizzi, and another past president of our college. And I met Dr. Labrizzi when I was a resident at a meeting that they used to have at Flint Osteopathic every year. They had every month they did a CME that was regionally for the docs there, and they brought in pretty good speakers. And when on the Women's Health Day, they brought in Dr. Labrizzi, and he was there, and I met him and got to know him at that time. And Dr. Labrizzi is one of those folks that rose up as an MFM and trained in a prestigious allopathic institution at a time when that would be deemed to be more difficult than it is today. So I think I was influenced by that, their work ethic and their personalities, just being nice people. When I used to come to the ACOOG meetings, Dr. Richard Polk stands out as an individual who always reached out to the students and made sure they were comfortable and taken care of, and so forth. So it's those little things over time. And then another experience I had, it wasn't through our college, but it was through my work at AOBOG. We brought in
the two chairs of the ABOG at that time to come and observe our process. And two prominent, well-known physicians in the country, published textbooks, etc. And to work with them, and it was like, you know, we were treated very nicely. There was no egos involved, and they were very interested in what we were doing, and vice versa. So never sell yourself short, I would say, to the rising students and residents, and just, you know, have a good work ethic, do the best you can, be open, and people are people. It doesn't really matter from which walk or which training they came from.